Ciao, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Today I am featuring 3 delicious breakfast recipes. They don't necessarily need to be breakfast, but there's always a theme to my recipe videos. High protein, high fiber, full of micronutrients, macronutrients, great seasonal-ish breakfast recipes. Just like in my January 1st meal prep recipe video, I am keeping the theme of a very zestful winter time. I want to use 2 things that are quintessential part to the Mediterranean diet amongst many things. So we have lots of citrus going on in today's recipe video, as well as fresh herbs. Herbs are used as toppings or rarely seen much in the American cuisine, but I want to bring as much herbs as I possibly can to the forefront, if I haven't already in the past few years. I want you guys to fall in love with herbs, not just as a little topping, but like truly mixed into the recipe. The herbs become the star of the show. It might be too flavorful for some people, but for me, I can never have enough flavor, and herbs are not only so delicious, but so medicinal. When we say food is medicine, herbs definitely go under that category. As always, I try to make my recipes as flexible as possible, as easy as possible, but I also try to keep them as homemade as possible. I try to also list as much as I can throughout recipe videos of the variations that you can do, but if there is something that I don't mention that you are curious about, please always feel free to ask me in the comments. If you have any questions about absolutely anything in this recipe video, or ways to change up the recipe that I don't mention, please leave it in the comments below. But speaking of chatting, I think that is enough chit-chatting. Let's hop in to recipe number 1. For recipe number 1, we are doing high protein, cheesy sun-dried tomato flatbreads. Sun-dried tomato pesto, fantastic all year round. The Mediterranean culture is all about preserving things. I've literally seen in Sicily, they take tomatoes and lay them out into the sun, hence sun-dried tomatoes, and they are great for when it's not tomato season. On January 17th, when I'm filming this, it's not tomato season. Tomatoes are available, of course. I use basil, which is technically not available in the seasonal world, but we do live in a modern world. So I always try my best to keep the balance, because in a world where I want to be as seasonal as possible, it is a modern world. So this whole entire recipe starts off with making a batch of sun-dried tomato pesto. Yes, of course, Caroline is making a sauce first thing in her recipe video. If you've not watched my previous recipe videos, you know how important homemade sauces are. It is a big thing that I always harp on, so I'll skip past it right now. But anyways, it starts out with a half a cup of sun-dried tomatoes, half a lemon juiced, a 1/3 cup of roasted almonds. If you don't like almonds or you want to choose something else, you could do pistachios, pinoli's, and keep it classic pesto, or even walnuts. A bunch of fresh basil. You could use fresh or dried oregano. I use dried. If you do use dried, you want to half the amount that's in the recipe, because dried herbs are always so much more powerful than fresh herbs. Of course, some garlic, fresh Parmigiano Reggiano. You always want to use the fresh stuff. You always want to use the nicest stuff. And then I don't add any salt. We have so much salt going on from the Parmigiano and the sun-dried tomatoes. Those are both super salty, but that's up to your flavor taste buds. As well as a cup of extra virgin olive oil. But I don't add in all the olive oil. In fact, I only add in about maybe a 1/3 of a cup to begin with, because I want to reserve about a 1/4 a cup of this pesto for the cheese filling that you will see later on. And then I add in the rest of the oil. Even when I do add in the rest of the oil, the pesto stays quite pasty. It's not super runny or saucy. I really enjoy keeping my pesto almost like a paste, because it can lend itself to different recipes. I can add it to all these things where I could add more. So if I'm making pasta, I would add more oil and use some of the pasta water to make a pasta sauce. But if I keep it a nice paste, I could also spread it on sandwiches. I could spread it on flatbreads. I could spread it on pizza. I could mix the paste in with some ricotta and then make a sun-dried tomato pesto ricotta. You could put this into some chickpeas and tahini and make a sun-dried tomato pesto hummus. You see how my brain works? It's clearly never ending. You can make the simplest, like 4 or 5 ingredient meals, as long as you have really healthy, amazing, flavorful sauces. Life is easier when you have these on hand. And they're so much healthier to make at home, and it's not that complicated, because if you make a big batch like this, you can freeze half of it and have it on hand. You want to freeze any leftover pesto you don't think you're going to use within about maybe a week to 10 days. So that's my little spiel on the pesto. So now that we have the pesto made, let's move on to the dough. I made a high protein dough. You guys have heard of it. It's super viral. You've seen it on social media. It is 1 cup of self-rising flour to 1 cup of Greek yogurt. That's all it is. Now, Here's the thing, people get frustrated because every Greek yogurt is made differently. So depending on the brand you have, the ratios really might not be 1-to-1. This is not sponsored by any means, but Faye for me is a super high quality, affordable Greek yogurt that I feel like has a good ratio for 1 cup of Greek yogurt to 1 cup of self-rising flour. P.S. if you don't have self-rising flour, which who does, you could just use 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of salt to 1 cup of flour. That's the ratio for homemade self-rising flour. Stir the flour and the yogurt together and a dough forms. Mine was pretty sticky. You see that it kind of doesn't get really smooth. It kind of has some bumps to it, and then it really sticks to my fingers. And then if you press it in, you notice it doesn't bounce back. I mean, come on, it's not a real dough. It's just flour and yogurt. However, I noticed that if I let my dough sit for about 20 minutes, which is great because that gives you time to make the filling, it becomes the consistency that you want. 4 ounces of feta and 1/2 cup of your favorite melting cheese. I have the recipe in the description. You can find all the recipes in the description. You take the dough, you cut it, put those all off to the side, and then you roll each one in a ton of flour. Don't be afraid to use a lot of flour. I like to pinch the dough underneath itself to create a ball, and then I try to keep flipping it back and forth to make sure each side has tons of flour in between each roll. You don't want to get it too thin. I always roll them out too thin. Every time I go to make these, I tell myself not to roll them too thin, and I do, because if they're too big, then there's too much dough on one side and it's way too thin of dough on the other side. But at the end of the day, you cannot really screw these up. There's no way to screw these up. Scoop anywhere from like 3 tablespoons to even like, I don't know, 1/4 cup of that cheese mixture on the inside. Wrap the dough around. You always want to cook the side with the most dough first, because that'll take way longer, and then the really thin side that was technically the top of the flatbread, that cooks secondly. And I know what you're thinking, Caroline, this sounds so indulgent for a breakfast recipe. Cheese and dairy are huge on the Mediterranean diet. A lot of Mediterranean cultures eat bread and cheese for breakfast. This is just a variation of it, but it can also be a fantastic snack or lunch idea paired with a side salad or some fresh veggies. The last thing I wanted to note about these flatbreads, if you wanted to prep them, because yes, they do take a little bit of labor and love because you have to roll each one out. If you have the time, it's worth it. It's not hard to make, it just does take a little bit of extra time. So if you want to freeze them, if you want to double the batch and freeze 1/2 of them or freeze them all and then defrost maybe 2 overnight and then fry them in the pan for breakfast or for a snack, I would recommend making them all and then laying them on a large tray with a piece of parchment, throwing that in the freezer. So once they're frozen, then I would put them in a freezer safe Ziploc baggie, in a container that's freezer safe, but they're perfect for freezing. I just would recommend freezing them raw because to get that crispy exterior, you definitely would want to cook them in the moment. That's the best way to have them. They don't microwave too well. I mean, they can microwave. And then, yes, I definitely added sun-dried tomato pesto on top for the aesthetic, for the whole look of things. You really don't need to add all that oil on top. In fact, you lose a lot of the crispy crunch of the bread if you add oil on top. So I think it's finally time to try these. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Cheese is not an enemy. Cheese is high in protein, it's great calcium, we need it. Just make sure you're choosing super high quality sources of cheese. I mean, that's the key to the Mediterranean diet. There's nothing you can't eat in moderation as long as it's super high quality. You have to try it. It tastes like a healthy, cheesy pizza thing. My hands are covered in oil. I'm gonna wash them and we're gonna move on to recipe number 2. For recipe number 2, we have the only granola recipe that you're ever going to need to make. That's not true because I have other amazing recipes of granola on my website. But I realized I didn't have a super duper classic everything granola. And I think I've developed one of the greatest granola recipes of all time. If you like big clumps and clusters of granola, this is the recipe for you. But let's talk about this incredible granola. Probably gonna be intimidated by the amount of ingredients that go into this granola. I did that because I'm a health nut and I have all of these ingredients always in my kitchen. I never not have these ingredients. But if you don't keep all of these always on hand, there's a way to simplify this recipe super easy. This granola is so good. Anyways, so this granola recipe starts off with rolled oats, a combination of 3 nuts. And then of course, lots and lots of seeds. Ground flax. I feel like the ground flax helps keep everything pretty binded for the most part. My fruit of choice, I love chewy, delicious dried dates. I love any dried fruit that doesn't have sugar in it. So apricots are great, dried figs, dried dates. You could do raisins. I think they sell at Trader Joe's cherries that are super nice, that are unsweetened. So I recommend a dried fruit just because it helps with the chewiness and the sweetness. I added just a touch of cardamom. I like the warmth and the spiciness that cardamom gives, and cardamom complements citrus so well. And then to flavor this granola, I used all 3 citruses. I used limes, oranges, and lemons. You could just do lemons. Orange on its own is also pretty delicious. I wish I lived in a really cool location where I could get bergamot, other fun citrus fruits, but I don't. And I use just the zest because that's where so much of the flavor is held. If you use the zest of citrus but don't cut it open or juice it, you never want to put it back in the fridge without the zest on because it starts to get hardened. So you always want to plastic wrap any of your citrus that you zest because otherwise it'll get super hard. I only used a half a cup of honey. There is the most minimal amount of sweetness to this. I didn't want to make it super sweet. We need to work on our sweet tooth in 2025. I need to work on it. We need to lower our intolerance on sweets. It tastes like almost like a Christmas cookie with all the citrus and the honey. If you're not used to not sweet things, I would recommend doing 1 cup of honey, half a cup of oil, and half a cup of any of your favorite nut butters or seed butters. You could use sunflower butter. You could use tahini. Tahini would be so yummy in this. I made my own homemade almond butter, and you want to make sure that it's really drippy. So any nut butter or seed butter that you use, make sure it's really drippy. So that means like if you take the knife out of it or like take a spoon and pour it, like it's dripping, it's not super thick. And then the tips to making this super clustery, amazing granola is to make sure you have this 9x13 tray with a little bit of like, I would say that's probably like an inch rim, and pack it in completely. It's gonna feel weird because usually you're told to lightly spread it out on a tray and there's lots of space. I want it packed like you're making granola bars, because that way when it cools completely, which you want to make sure it does, you want to get it nice and golden brown, and then you want to cool it completely, then you break it up and you get these huge clusters. And I recommend keeping them bigger than you'd like, because every time you go to like grab some out of the jar, they tend to just break on themselves. They're like the Nature Valley bars where like they tend to crumble pretty lightly, and it's just so fun to do. It's definitely a mess, so they like all the little seeds and stuff fall when you do it. So much amazing fiber. If you start your day out with this, your gut is gonna be so happy because you have amazing healthy fats, amazing fiber, which is so good for gut health. The protein is there, so much natural protein from all these nuts, and the oats add some protein as well. And there's just so many ways you can use this granola. If you don't like citrus, if you're like, Caroline, I don't like a lot of lemon, I would seek help. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I don't know who doesn't like a lot of lemon, but do like a lot of vanilla extract, and so that way you have like a vanilla granola. Or you could add in chocolate chips if you want to make a chocolate granola. There's a lot of little flavors you could change, like get creative with it, like a super cinnamony granola. So like add in like a tablespoon of cinnamon to this entire batter. There's a lot of like flavor variations when it comes to spices or mix-ins, like freeze-dried fruits. If the olive oil scares you, don't let it scare you, but it would probably be a slightly sweeter with that half cup of honey if you used something like avocado oil, which was a neutral oil. You decide what you like, decide what you want to try, but make sure you decide to make this recipe because it's amazing. It's gonna be your new go-to. It's incredible for meal prep. It makes so much. All these recipes are great for meal prep. I promise your whole kitchen is gonna smell like a delicious cookie. It reminds me of something I'd be eating in Italy for Christmas. I'm gonna finish breaking this all up and put it in a container, and then we're gonna move on to recipe number 3. For the third and final recipe, we're going to make a incredibly high protein option, which is egga. Egga is what I've researched and found to be a delicious Egyptian or Middle Eastern style omelet kind of thing, loaded with herbs, sometimes onions, sometimes veggies, sometimes even ground meat and spices. Basically, I made my version of it, did a traditional kind of frittata base, 6 eggs to half a cup of milk. I love the idea of making something so loaded with herbs. I want to treat herbs like we eat arugula or spinach. I would love to wake up to this super lemony herb spiced frittata in the fridge. You could even bake the frittata in little muffins. I feel like that would be great. This is one of those recipes where I need to convince you that even though it doesn't look pretty, I promise this is one of the best tasting things I've made. It just doesn't look pretty because the spices really change that egg color and make it quite brown. So it's hard for me to sell this. I also made it in too big of a pan, so it's super, super thin, which I actually kind of like how thin it is. Put it on like a breakfast sandwich if you wanted to. You could put it on a piece of toast. You have to believe me when I tell you this is such a delicious frittata. The spices and the herbs, so you have the warmth of the spices, the flavor of the spices, the layers of just all kinds of things going on, and then you have those really, really fresh herbs that just make this dish equally cozy as it is refreshing, and just so loaded with so much flavor in every bite. And you saw that I added a little bit of goat cheese on top. I tried to take it out of the pan. I was being really impatient with myself, and it flipped and it broke. So I kind of just smeared the goat cheese all over top, which actually I'm kind of happy I did, because it made it super delicious that way. So you had a little bit of goat cheese in every bite, and I kind of liked a little smear of goat cheese on top. You could also use labna. You could use a little bit of Greek yogurt. And then I did a little bit more of lemon zest, some sumac, and some more herbs on top. And I'm telling you guys, it is so easy to make, so easy for meal prep, super light, a super, super healthy option. Frittatas are so popular all around the Mediterranean. You know, the Spanish omelet is super famous, frittata is super famous. I feel like every country in the Mediterranean has their own version of a frittata, and this is Egyptian one, and I'm so excited to try it. I can smell all the delicious layers and layers of spices, and then some herbs. I can't wait. I'm not a huge egg person, but the flavors in this are incredible. So delicious. I love the creamy, tangy goat cheese on top. It helps really balance everything out. But if you wanted to keep this completely dairy-free, you could use a dairy-free milk and just leave out the goat cheese. So many herbs. It's so delicious. Don't knock it until you try it. You cannot say you don't like this recipe if you've never tried it. If you love spices, if you love herbs, if you love quick and easy high protein options, this is gonna be your recipe. So good. That concludes this recipe video. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment of the recipe that you're most excited to try, or any questions you have on the modern Mediterranean lifestyle or diet, as well as anything you'd like to see from me. If you have any ideas of questions or things you'd like to see me make or try or share, I love hearing that from you guys. It helps me so much continue to create videos that you enjoy and that bring value to you. And I'm just so incredibly grateful for you. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and until next time, I hope you create a very, very zestful day. Ciao.